Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Prevention is your first line of defense from ransomware. But what if prevention fails? My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. Today's event is brought to you by StorageCraft, and we have got an awesome event lined up for you today. Before I introduce you to today's presenter, I want to first go over a little bit of welcome and housekeeping information here that you need to know about. We want this to be an educational event, so we encourage you to ask all the questions you have about ransomware, data protection, disaster recovery. We want you to get those answers on this event today. We want to help you solve your challenges. And so use the questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel to ask all of your questions, and we'll do our best in our Q&A session to get all of those answered. We also have a number of handouts available for download there in your audience console. We have solution briefs on the product you'll be learning about today, as well as a number of reports from ESG that you should be aware of. So go ahead and download those handouts, and you can check those out after the event. And then finally, we will have an Amazon $300 gift card to give away to one lucky prize winner on today's live event. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry the drawing has already occurred. Full price terms and conditions can be found at our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenter. That is Mr. Sean Darrington, Senior Director of Product Management at StorageCraft. Sean, thank you for being on the event today.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, before I hand it over to Sean, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry today. I mean, unfortunately, it's a little bit of bad news, but stick with me because the good news is coming. I mean, if you're in the world of IT today, you probably know a lot of this already, but, just stick with me for a moment here. I mean, I want you to know how much companies out there, IT organizations, are struggling, especially with compliance, with disaster preparation, with constant complexity, dynamically changing environments, massively growing data sets. At the same time, they're being asked to control costs more and more. And then in the news every night, when we sit down and eat dinner and watch the evening news, we have all these stories about ransomware. And so I know that's keeping a lot of IT professionals up at night. I was talking to the owner of a managed service provider just last week who said, ransomware is the number one thing that keeps him up at night, and he's doing everything possible to try to, prevent what he fears will eventually, most certainly, be a breach one day. But trying to prevent that before it ever happens, and if it does happen or when it does happen, he wants to be prepared. So, I mean, the statistics out there are scary. 36% of companies surveyed in one report said that they know that they will be faced with an internal or external security breach of some kind. Or I'm sorry, they have been hit with one already. And so when they were hit, 2.36 terabytes of data was the average amount of data that was lost. And I mean, that's a ton of data. That's a lot of data. That could be the employee database. That could be this customer database, and the average data loss was $900,000, and that was just an average. I mean, that's in the middle. So obviously there was a lot more, lot larger losses than that at some companies. And surprisingly, only 18% of those surveyed said that their current data protection solution would be able to meet their future business challenges. So they didn't feel that their current data protection solution was able to meet the threats, both today and in the future. I mean, so unfortunately, this is the bad news. But in my mind, the good news is that we have more and more innovative data protection solutions coming out, all the time. And the data protection solutions and disaster recovery solutions seem to be, more and more innovative. And when it comes to detecting ransomware, preventing ransomware, recovering from ransomware. And I'm excited to have Sean from StorageCraft on the event today to help educate us on what is going on at StorageCraft, what's new at StorageCraft, how the StorageCraft solution can help you, and how it can help you to sleep better at night, when it comes to all the ransomware threats that are going on today. So with that, I'm excited to hand it over to Sean. Sean, let me change presenter over to you. All right, I see your
Great, thanks,
screen.
David.
Take it
I
away,
think you
Sean.
should be, everybody, you should be able to see my screen okay?
I can, yeah. Take it away.
Excellent, thanks, David. Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining, and it's great to see we've got lots of people from Ohio and San Francisco and throughout the US, and well, no international people as of yet, but I'm sure they're out there. And what I want to do is just quickly follow up with some of the comments that David made, because one of the things that we've been seeing within our customer base, and unfortunately, we have had a number of our customers be infected with ransomware. Fortunately, everybody that we know about have been able to recover their data, but what they're telling us is that, and what we're seeing from a variety of reports, is that it's no longer an issue about an individual seeking notoriety, right? It's actually becoming a significant business. So it's a multi-billion-dollar business in terms of how many companies have paid a ransom after their data has been compromised. And we're also seeing not only just the shift from an individual to a business-oriented attack, it's actually the phishing attacks and URLs are becoming very targeted, even to some verticals, particularly state and local government. Healthcare are two that we've seen within our installed base, our customers, as well as the actual ransomware virus themselves. They are actually becoming more sophisticated and morphing to become more difficult to A, detect, but B, becoming more sophisticated in how they can actually compromise the company's data in terms of being able to disable snapshots, as an example, or be able to lay in a stealth mode for a period of weeks or months until the backups actually expire, and then they raise the ransom, and now you're not able to get the data back. But if you look at the number of attacks compared between 2017 and 2018, there's a significant increase, and we expect this to continue, unfortunately. And so the question really is not when your company will be exposed to some type of data loss, right, or a scenario where you have to recover the data, whether it be an application, a VM corruption, a system failure, unfortunately, potentially a ransomware attack. You have to be prepared to be able to answer the question about how I'm going to do this in a when, not if scenario. So one of the things that we've done here at StorageCraft is really built out a portfolio, depending upon the size of your company, depending upon the deployment options. If you have small offices, if you have data centers, if you have multiple data centers, there are a variety of options to take a look at how you can actually protect your data and actually manage the storage effectively. And that's initially with OneSafe. OneSafe is a converged scale-out storage solution that combines the ability to provide data protection for VMs and physical servers in really an SLA-driven process. And I'll show you some screenshots later within OneSystem about how you can do that. But it also provides the ability to actually manage the storage as a primary storage solution. So you can really begin to rethink your data protection strategy overall and think about what data do I need to protect in the traditional sense of taking VM snapshots every 15 minutes or hour or daily. Alternatively, if the data, the unstructured data, is actually stored in OneSafe, we're actually taking continuous snapshots. And I'll get into a little about why our architecture is unique and how that can actually protect your data. But it also gives you the ability to offload those file servers onto a OneSafe cluster, and you can scale out that cluster based upon the storage capacity you need, whether it be tens of terabytes or hundreds of terabytes or a petabyte, doesn't matter. You can also combine the capability of the primary storage for the unstructured data, as well as the backup and recovery in the traditional data protection sense. So now you have a complete scale-out solution that has the ability to provide data protection services and primary storage services in the same cluster, really in a shared pool, a global pool of capacity that you can look to use. Now, from a data protection standpoint, we also have a software-only version, and that's ShadowSafe. So if you have remote offices, or if you're a small organization and you have a handful of terabytes and you may not need to start at tens of terabytes, you can deploy ShadowSafe, which is a software-only solution that provides the same data protection capabilities as OneSafe Converged does for your physical or virtual servers. But now this is a software-only solution that you can use either internal storage to a server, or you can use third-party storage as a backup target. Now, in both of these scenarios, this is protecting data that's on premises, okay? And with both of these solutions, based upon those data protection policies that you define, you can certainly back up and protect that information locally, but you can also replicate that to the cloud. In this case, StorageCraft, we have our cloud services that allows you to think about really DR as a service, where you can actually recover the application, the data, the network, everything you need to run your business in our cloud. In fact, you can actually orchestrate the recovery of which VMs need to be recovered first, and which VMs need to be recovered second. I'm using the example of VMs, but they don't have to be VMs. They can be physical servers as well. Alternatively, if you want to replicate to a third-party cloud like Amazon, you can do that as an S3 storage target, but you have that flexibility to decide based upon a deployment model what you're actually looking to solve and when are you actually looking to solve that. Because underneath the covers, OneSafe is a unique scale-out architecture. In this diagram here, you can see this illustration of the traditional block store, right? Traditional RAID LUNs and volumes from SAN or NAS vendors for the last 3 decades that have a fixed placement of the data on a particular LUN and a particular drive or a number of drives in a RAID group, but they're providing file protocols and in some cases block protocols as well. Now, this really solved the problems beginning 3 decades ago. However, they're not solving the problems of today and being able to scale out seamlessly and be able to provide some advanced recovery features that OneSafe does. And so what OneSafe is it's actually a distributed object store. So this is part of our intellectual property. These are our patents that we have around an object store that we've written that gives you all the benefits of object storage. And for those that may not be as familiar with object storage, it's like Amazon S3, GCP or Azure, right? It's a way to be able to present applications storage capacity. In most cases, object storage requires a RESTful API. In OneSafe's case, we present NFS and SMB. We provide those file services on the top half, if you will, that the applications can use, and it looks like scale-out network-attached storage. It looks like an SMB or an NFS share that your users just connect to, and they've got a map network drive. But the difference is that it's built upon an object store, so there are no file size limitations, there are no file system capacity limitations. You can have a 2 terabyte share or a 200 terabyte share that your users are connecting to. It doesn't matter. And as those files are being written, we actually do inline deduplication globally across all the shares in the cluster. We also do compression, which is you can decide if you want to have compression on or off based upon the type of data that you're writing to the cluster. But we also are taking continuous snapshots that are immutable of all the file system changes every 90 seconds. And the reason this is important is because we're an immutable object store, everything that's written to us is stored as an object. And we can move that object anywhere we need to in the cluster. So if you add another node, we can redistribute the objects as needed. However, everything from the file system above is completely insulated from any changes in the object store. So as you're writing a new PowerPoint file that you just saved a couple slides for, instead of overwriting the data, like in a traditional block store where you do a read, modify, write of the parity, and that original data is gone, you cannot get it back. With us, all the original objects are there. And when you write a new and save that, when you save that new PowerPoint file, we're only going to update the objects that are needed, and let's just say it's 5 objects for simplicity. Those 5 objects are written to the object store, but all the original objects are still there. And that's one of the reasons why you can go back to actually recovering the data as you need to from an immutable object store. That ransomware, the users, admins cannot delete snapshots, okay? Now the Converged capability, you'll see there on the right-hand side, the data protection, those data protection services that are communicating with VMware and agents in a physical server, those are actually running on the cluster itself. And this is what I mean by a converged solution. So you're not going over NFS or SMB or iSCSI in a traditional sense. We actually have RPCs that are communicating between our data protection services. So you have a much more efficient and much more scalable solution for this. And so as you look at options for OneSafe and how that can actually protect your data, there are a few things that we do. Number one, the data protection services that I spoke about for the primary storage, you can decide how long you'd like to keep the snapshots. The snapshots are always going to happen, assuming you have them turned on, every 90 seconds, okay? And then from there, we begin to thin them out. So you have 90-second snapshots for the first hour, hourly snapshots for the first day, daily snapshots for the first month and weekly forever, okay? So what that affords you is the ability to not back up the unstructured data as you typically would. Now you can remotely replicate that to another site for offsite storage, but you also have the ability for agent or agentless data protection, right? For physical or virtual servers. So if you're in a virtual environment for VMware, you don't have to install an agent in each VM. You certainly can if you want something like granular recovery for Exchange. But you have the same way to protect physical and virtual servers in a consistent SLA-based methodology. And I'll show you some of those things, in just a second here. As I was talking about the options for rethinking and kind of taking advantage of the next way of thinking about data protection is really OneSafe. And here I have an illustration. Again, it depends upon your deployment model and what's a priority for you as an organization today over time. The good news is that regardless of where you start out with, you can always enable these other deployment options simply by licensing services, right? So the same hardware that you buy today to just do the unstructured data part, to just store all the video content. If you're a law enforcement agency and you need to have the dash cam and body cam videos stored in an immutable fashion that can't be deleted, it can always be recovered. You can do that. If you need to have file serving for your organization and you want to give your users the ability to recover a previous version of their Word file just by right mouse Windows previous version over the life of those snapshots for last year, you can do that as well. And if you decide to roll in the data protection, you simply add that subscription to the OneSafe cluster, and now you can begin to back up the data as well. And that pool of storage that you're using in the cluster can be used across either of these scenarios for data protection or primary storage. There's no more need to think about how I'm going to do capacity planning on a per server or per application or per group of users basis. That pool of storage is accessible to everybody accessing the cluster. And that provides a lot of flexibility, because if you look at how the data is protected from an object store, not only is it protecting the immutable snapshots, which I described, it's also protecting your guarantee to get back the original data that you wrote. So there's no risk of having a file system be corrupt from silent data corruption of just the hard drives, right? Uber or bit rot over time, where you have a parity bit flip, and now your file system, what you're reading from that volume, is now corrupt. With us, because everything is an object, it's actually a hash value that we know what the original object is. And when it's read back to provide the number of objects that make up a file that's being delivered to the client, we know if that object isn't what it was originally written as. And so if there is bit flip and that hash value does not equate to what was originally written, we can go get another object that is a replica for protecting against failure domains and ensure that you can actually get back the file that you had originally written. And that's particularly important when you're looking like healthcare for HIPAA, patient records, if you're looking at the dash cam, body cam, as I was describing earlier, for law enforcement agencies. We have here in California, one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the state has multiple OneSafe clusters, which stores all the CSI data, evidentiary data from the crime scene investigators in this cluster. It has to be immutable, it has to be protected, remotely replicated across 2 sites. And so that's one example about how you can begin to deploy this. There are a couple of questions that have been coming in, which is great. Feel free to continue to ask them. I am monitoring that question box as well, and we'll also have some time at the end as well. But one of the questions was around the maximum number of snapshots that can be held. So there's essentially an infinite number of snapshots that you can have within a cluster. It's actually, I mean, a few million snapshots. But the interesting thing with the snapshots is not only just the capability of providing an immutable snapshot, which is very important. However, the other thing about snapshots is that every snapshot is actually deduplicated against the primary storage. So if you have a 100 terabyte cluster and you're having moderate change rates, every time we're taking a snapshot, even though we're taking 90-second snapshots and you're going to have thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of snapshots, you're not worried about duplicating the volume of the original data. You're not worried about running out of a volume that you've allocated as a snapshot target for your primary data, right? These snapshots are all deduplicated. They're just keeping basically track of the links of every object in the file system and how that changes over time. And so you can go back to any recovery point and instantly recover your data. And I'll show you in just a minute about exactly how that happens. But that's the answer for the number of snapshots. You can also decide on a per share basis the different retention periods for snapshots, and you can also turn them off if you'd like to. But you can, on a per share basis, decide if I'm going to keep them for an hour, a day, forever, or 3 years, or whatever the term may be. For the trial version, there was another question here about a trial version. We do have a trial version of the data protection software, so ShadowSafe. We have a 30-day trial for that. For OneSafe, we do have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you purchase OneSafe, and depending upon your deployment options, you can use either the primary storage and/or data protection, and you have 30 days to use that. And so it's a little bit different. It's not a trial, it's actually a money-back guarantee, as opposed to the software-only 30-day download that you can use as you'd like to for 30 days. And so let me go into the kind of the second scenario, right? So we talked about the primary storage for OneSafe. You can also use OneSafe in a converged solution. So now I'm actually providing the backup and recovery services in addition to the structured data. So just an illustration here. And then lastly, you can get that actually off-site, because as many of you on the phone know, disaster strikes, right? Accidents happen. If you're in Houston, I mean, flooding a few years ago, hurricanes, et cetera. So there's certainly the natural disasters, but they're also just site-wide. Like we had a customer here in California, their data center wound up flooding, right? Not because of a natural disaster, sprinklers, and the data center room was not protected as it should be, so they had to do a failover scenario. So you can replicate your data to another OneSafe cluster to recover any of that data offsite if you have a second location. Alternatively, you can go to our cloud for full DR as a service for those physical or virtual servers, and you can actually begin to recover that data in a handful of minutes, right? 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much prep you do. We give you the opportunity to do different DR scenarios, do practice recovery runs, orchestrate which VMs are going to be recovered in which order, so that you actually are bringing up your domain controllers first and then everything else afterwards, or whatever your business needs are. You can determine how you want to recover that data. And I mentioned earlier about Azure and S3, you can do as a storage target as well. So there's a variety of options about how you can get your data protected not only on premises, but also off-site, so that you can recover from different scenarios from different locations. The other thing to take a look at as we look at the OneSafe, as we talked about, is how is it actually managed. As a product manager from the beginning, as I've owned this product, I've always focused on OneSystem being our cloud-based management service, and how that you can manage storage as easily as possible. So the vast majority, when I say the vast majority, like 99% of what you're going to do is all done through our cloud-based management service, OneSystem. You log into OneSystem, depending on your model, onesystem.xbox.com or onesystem.storagecraft.com, and you can actually manage your storage, clusters, data protection, et cetera. You really don't need to know any command line operations. I know there are a lot of people on the line that would love to do that, and there are some options to do that, but for the most part, everything is point and click. It's very simple yet powerful. As an example, you can set up remote replication for 50 shares if you want to, for your cluster, in 4 mouse clicks. Okay, you can promote a read-only target to be read-writable for your users in your DR location in those same 4 mouse clicks, and that promotion of 1 or 50 shares takes place in just a couple of seconds, and now you're off and running. You update your DNS entries. That target cluster is now where your users are going. So there's actually a lot of opportunities to simplify and spend less time managing storage and give you back as much time as possible, so that you can do the other things within your organization that are going to drive business. In fact, one of the things that we've done is made it very simple from a data protection standpoint to say, okay, I'm going to actually protect my VMs, and I'm going to decide a particular policy about how I'm going to protect these VMs. I'm going to take snapshot every 15 minutes. I'm going to determine my storage target here. I'm going to a local OneSafe. I'm going to determine my recovery points, how long I would like to keep that retention, and if I'm going to replicate this offsite or not. And you're done. And it's literally a handful of clicks that you have to go through to create a policy, and you can assign this policy to 1 VM or 100 VMs very easily. And it's just a couple of clicks. So if you look at the way things have typically been done with multiple windows and multiple put in the URL, put in the NTP servers, put in the UNC path or the IP address. A lot of that actually goes away with what we've done with OneSystem, as well as you can report and see the success for those given policies. So if a policy is protecting 50 VMs and it's missing the snapshots every 15 minutes and you're only getting them once an hour because of other errors, then you can actually begin to see the trend about what do I need to do to change or fix a potential problem so that I can adhere to my policies. So this is actually one of the things that's very flexible from a data protection standpoint, but it is something that you can do very easily. In addition to looking at how are we going to recover the data, right? So if you look at protecting the data as the first line of defense, we talked about the implications of ransomware and so forth. This is in addition to obviously all the security things you're going to do. But if you do have to recover the data, how quickly can I get it back and how do I get it back? So there are a couple different scenarios about recovering your data. And the first is in the event of physical or virtual server failure, right? This is another area where StorageCraft has a number of patents around VirtualBoot. So VirtualBoot is a way to recover a system that you're protecting. I say a system in general because it could be a VM or physical server, but it begins to actually boot that VM in less than a second. So in about 4 mouse clicks here, this is in OneSystem again, you choose the machine or system you're going to recover, what recovery point you want, and you can see different timestamps here, 303, 903, etc., depending on how frequently you're taking snapshots and where you'd like to recover that from. If you're doing replication to another OneSafe in a remote location, if you're doing replication to our cloud, you can actually determine where you want to recover, what recovery point, and where you want that recovery to happen from. After that, the VM begins to boot. And in less than a second, as I mentioned, it begins to boot and the application is coming up. As that application is coming up, it begins to provide those application services to users. And if you look at the diagram here on the right-hand side, the recovered VM is still reading, thinks it's reading from the primary storage, that primary VMDK. However, it's actually being redirected to, in this case, the OneSafe target. And so OneSafe is restoring the data that the application needs now. And as it's using, it actually looks at an intelligent IO read-ahead pattern to recover the data that the application needs to provide services as it's running. And then the application, as it's updating that, writes it back out to the primary storage, the primary VMDK. And in the background, we do a lazy restore of everything else that the application eventually will need, but may not need it in that order. Once that data is being restored to the VM, it's actually being restored directly to the primary VMDK. That recovered VM never knew that anything changed. It always thought it was reading and writing to the primary storage, when in reality, it was reading from OneSafe and writing it to the primary storage as needed. Anything new that VM was writing, it would actually just write directly to the VMDK. So that means that you don't have any staging VM to set up before you begin the recovery process. It also means that you don't have to have a storage vMotion effort afterward for a planned movement from the storage target, the backup target, back to the primary storage, because everything has already been restored to the primary VMDK. This is also, you'll notice the recover from, it's got S3, or in this case doesn't have the StorageCraft DR as a service or cloud services, but this is also a way that you can do the fail back from the cloud. So if you are spinning up your VMs or servers in our cloud and running them for some period of time, and you need to do a fail back, you can certainly begin to do that, and that process will be the same, right? You'll recover it from the cloud, but recover it back on premises, and that same process happens there. So very flexible in terms of how you want to recover it. This can work for physical or virtual, and it can recover to another VM or physical server. So it's that system level recovery that is independent of the original hardware. The other type of recovery is from unstructured data, right? And I use ransomware here because this is one of the things that most organizations are obviously nervous about, particularly healthcare. For those that aren't in the healthcare industry, every record has a certain dollar amount associated with it in terms of if that is compromised, the hospital or healthcare organization, if it's not a hospital, that healthcare organization actually has to pay a fine for data that was compromised, right? And so if you're looking at 100 terabyte share of medical images, right? 3D mammography, X-ray scans, could be just health patient records, right? For normal office visits. All of those have dollar values associated with them. And when you're looking at the number of files, number of, and the amount of capacity, the way you're going to recover that is actually very easy with OneSafe. So we talked about the snapshots and how frequently we take them. But now with OneSafe, you can actually recover an entire share in less than in a few seconds. I mean, it's less than 10 seconds. It's probably 3 to 5, but let's just say it's less than 10 seconds, regardless of the size of the share. And this again is because the snapshots are immutable, but it maps to an object, right? And a set of objects that make up that file system as of that point in time. And so as an administrator, you can go in and you can clone the live file system of that share, or you can go in and recover and promote a snapshot of that share from a prior point in time. And you can see every snapshot over the time. In this case, I've got the snapshot retention set to 3 months. So I will have weekly snapshots for 3 months. I will have hourly snapshots for the first day and daily for the first month. So there's lots of options to determine at what point in time was my file system compromised by ransomware, go back to the prior point and promote that entire snapshot as a new share. And in a few seconds, you just recovered 10 terabytes, a petabyte, 300 terabytes, the capacity doesn't matter in a few seconds. You rename that newly cloned share to be the original, and now everything is off and running. The users are still accessing the virtual IP address in the cluster as they would before. They're just now accessing the file system as of the point prior to the infection. Okay. Now you still have that original share that you can do triage and analysis, or you can just delete that entire thing. But it's very flexible to be able to give you the ability to quickly recover from a full system or full share level recovery. You can also go in and navigate that share and pull out any file or folder just by copying it out and giving it to the user or to another directory. So this is actually one of the things that you as an administrator, you can determine if you want to give the users the ability to right mouse Windows previous version, and they'll see the 10 or 100 different versions of their PowerPoint that they've saved over the time based upon the length of the snapshot retention. Alternatively, you can enable access-based enumeration with Active Directory, and you can have your users submit a help desk ticket, and then you as an IT administrator can actually fulfill that request for, if they delete an individual file, they can put it through you. But in either way, you have the option to recover easily from file, folder, or an entire share. And as I mentioned, these are something that on a per share basis, you can determine if compression's on off, you can determine if you want to replicate that share, and you can determine how long you want to keep the snapshots. So in that converged solution of data protection and primary storage, you're going to have different shares with different requirements based upon how long you want to keep that data from and provide the ability to have recovery points up to a certain point. And if you want to replicate that off-site, you can do so on a per share basis. So there are a couple of questions that came in, and then there's one last slide here. This is actually another demo that I did, which went through a few different recovery scenarios of OneSafe for the primary storage, for the snapshots, but also through VirtualBoot that you can take a look at and watch afterwards. So there are a couple questions that came in here that I want to address, and then David, I'll turn it over to you for anything else. From a scalability standpoint, how large can your clusters scale? So today, we can scale to 7 nodes in a cluster, and we have different OneSafe models. We have all flash as well as hard drive based models. So the all flash model has up to 38 terabytes of all flash, and you can scale that to 7 nodes. We also have OneSafe, the 4417 model, which is a hard drive based model that actually can have 204 terabytes per node. So you're looking at about 1.5 petabytes of raw capacity in a single cluster. And depending upon the fault domain protection, that'll be either half or a third usable, right? That's before any deduplication or compression benefits. We actually use a replication strategy for replicating the objects to protect against drive or node failures. So in that situation, where I mentioned if you had 7 4417 nodes in a cluster, you could actually lose 2 nodes of the 7, lose 34 drives or 400 terabytes of capacity in the cluster, and your file system will still be available, and all of your data is still protected and available because of the replication that we have. And so you can lose a significant amount of storage, in this case 34 drives or 400 terabytes, and you still have all of your data protected. If this is a backup, a replication target, you can actually change how you want to do the drive failure. So you can have a primary cluster with 2 drive failure and a 7-node 4417 cluster. That can actually replicate to another hard drive based model, 4412 or all flash, and different drive protection. So the source and the target cluster don't have to be configured the same way. You can scale them as you'd like to. Okay. The other question here is for StorageCraft Cloud for the GPT volumes. Yeah, so if you're doing a data protection with OneSafe and you're actually replicating that data protection policy to our cloud, you'll be able to recover as you would just locally, right? So as part of that data protection policy, you should be able to do that for the person that was asking about the GPT volumes. David, let me turn it over to you and see if there are any other questions as they come in here that we can answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to remind everyone that we have a number of handouts there available for download. The DCIG Competitive Intelligence Reports, the Evaluator Group TCO Report, and the StorageCraft Ransomware Solutions Brief are all available in the Handouts tab. I also want to remind everyone to get in your questions. Let's see some more questions coming in now. Appreciate those. Let's see, Sean, a next question I saw here that came in, they're asking about the ShadowSafe, the software-only version. Is that best for locations that have less than 10 terabytes? And also, what are the requirements for that?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily less than 10 terabytes, but it tends to be the type of the deployment. So for the most, for today, I really was talking about OneSafe Converged and the data protection, as well as ShadowSafe being the software only. That's for an organization that you're managing your own infrastructure, right? If we have people on the call here that are actually in like a managed service provider where they're providing data protection services, both of these solutions are multi-tenant and MSP friendly. And so one of the areas where ShadowSafe is used very frequently and where StorageCraft has had success over the last 13 plus years is with Shadow Protect for those managed service providers that are managing smaller environments. So they're doing 50 different deployments and there is smaller capacity and maybe it's a handful of terabytes. That makes a little bit more financial sense because as you look at OneSafe, it's very economical. It's actually less than S3 storage. If you look at the 3-year total cost, it's less than S3 storage. So the ShadowSafe versus OneSafe in terms of the software only or converged, it's not necessarily a capacity. It's more about what are the other requirements around that. So there's a lot of deployment flexibility based upon your needs.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Another question here. Jeremy's asking exactly how do we buy, StorageCraft? Do we buy it directly through StorageCraft, or do we buy it through a VAR? How does that work?
Yeah, so StorageCraft, we are a channel-friendly company. We move everything through the channel. So if you have a partner that you work with, we can certainly work with them. You can reach out to me or sales, and we can actually have that conversation. If you don't have a partner, we can recommend one based upon where you geographically are. If you're a smaller company and, for example, don't have a second data center for remote replication, don't want to necessarily go to the cloud, we also have partners that do other hosting services as well. So that's an option as well. And David, there's a question here that came in about HPUX and AIX. So we actually have agents for Linux and Windows for the physical servers. We don't really support the other Unix-based versions. So unfortunately, that's not a good fit for the HPUX and Solaris market.
Okay, no worries. Another question here, they're asking about scalability of the OneSafe Converged solution. What increments, or exactly what are the details? How do I scale that up? Do I replace the appliance? Do I buy a second appliance? Do I add more storage to the existing appliance? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So you can actually start with what you need and scale out from there. So you can start with as little as a single node, which is very unique from other scale out options like Isilon and so forth. But you can start with a single node. And I do recommend that you start with fully populating at least 12 drives if you're going with a hard drive based solution. And even if you're looking at the 4417 model that has 17 drive base, start with 12 drives because performance improves as you have more spindles in the system. But from there, you can actually add individual nodes as you need to, and all that is non-disruptive. So if you start with a single node, you add a second one, we're going to redistribute the objects based upon the failure domain as needed. The file system is still available. Your users are still accessing your data. They just see that they have twice as much data, right? Now, at the same time, this is important because as you scale out and you look at the hardware life cycle of 3 or 5 years, depending on what you want to do, at that point, let's say you're 3 years down the road, you add the then current OneSafe models to your cluster. The data is all redistributed as needed, but you can proactively evacuate the old OneSafe models you want to retire. And we're going to move all the objects around the cluster as needed. Again, looking at failure domain protection to the new cluster, to the new nodes in the cluster. When everything is moved off, you just unplug the old, and the file system is exactly as it was before. Your users and applications don't know that anything has changed. You don't have to add additional UNC paths or IP addresses for your backups or anything like that. It just sees more storage, or storage is now on different hardware than it was previously.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Yeah, that sounds very easy to do. Let's see. Another question here. They're asking about, can you all protect my private cloud environment, like on premises? Do you have any list of compatibility and requirements?
Yeah, well, I think it depends upon, when you're talking about private cloud, if you're running that, a lot of people just call, a virtual server environment their own private cloud because it's more of like delivering services to the services to the business and so forth. So if you're looking at like a Haiku or something like that, we don't protect that environment from an agentless perspective. VMware and Hyper-V, yes, and obviously any physical servers for Linux and Windows as well. So that would be, and for the private cloud, if Kamara, I think that was you were asking that question. Feel free, we can follow up afterwards about your specific environment and if that's a good fit. But I'm not sure if that answered your question, but we can take it offline afterwards if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Another question here. What about how do I know that my data is recoverable? Are there compliance reports?
Yeah, there are reports in OneSystem. I showed one graph that kind of shows you the time series. You'll be able to see which backups were successful over time and what percentage of them were actually successful. In addition to that, we'll actually show you which servers are not protected, right? Which one, somebody spun up a VM and didn't apply a data protection policy, right? We'll show that to you as well. Now, you also have the option in OneSystem to have a default policy that's assigned to any VM that's spun up. So if you do have a group of admins that are spinning up VMs and they're not applying a data protection policy and you want to have a default one, we will automatically protect anything that's spun up, or you can leave it off and you can apply them manually yourself. But you do have a report to see which systems are protected, which systems were successful, as well as perhaps more importantly, which ones had failed so that you can remedy that next time.
All right. Excellent. Excellent.
David, there's one more question that came in about the backups, and this is about, are backups vulnerable to ransomware? Unfortunately, the backups are vulnerable to ransomware. We've had a couple of customers. There was a 5-star hotel in New York City here. Well, I'm in the Bay Area in California, but in New York City, there's a 5-star hotel that was still our customer. But I did a webinar with him a couple years ago. He had everything on Nimble storage. This is part of his VDI infrastructure. And he had all the file serving on OneSafe. It was called OneBlocks at the time. And all those Veeam backups are going to us as well, right? Because we do the inline deduplication compression. So you can use this as a Veeam backup target. You can obviously use our own data protection, but we do work with a lot of backup providers for that as well. Ransomware came in and infected his Veeam backups, encrypted all the VBKs, as well as encrypted all the primary data that was on Nimble, and all the Nimble snapshots. He wasn't able to recover anything. He wasn't able to get back his Veeam restores because everything was encrypted. However, because he had snapshots enabled, all the primary file serving data on us, as well as the previous version of those Veeam backup files, were protected with snapshots. So he got everything back that he had, because otherwise he would not have had anything, or he would have had to pay a significant amount of money for that. The other thing that happens is that I mentioned that the ransomware is becoming more targeted and sophisticated. In this case, with the hotel in New York City, it actually just encrypted all the backup files. We had another partner in VPLS in Southern California that actually had their customers' Veeam backups were deleted altogether, and we were able to go back with the snapshots at prior point in time, prior to the files being deleted, because they were protected with snapshots. They were able to get it back. So yes, the backup file, and those two examples were Veeam. They don't have to be Veeam. We have others as well. But the backup infrastructure has to be thought of as the same way as your primary storage, and looking at those vulnerabilities for ransomware.
Wow, those are scary, some scary stories there. And I know so many companies out there are dealing with, this same type of thing. Ransomware, when all lines of protection fail, data protection is kind of your last line of defense, and it's scary to think that your data protection might not be there if it's not designed, in the best possible way, like the StorageCraft solution is. Well, it looks like we're starting to run out of time here. Sean, any further comments or questions that you wanted to cover?
No, I thanks everybody for attending. Lots of great questions. Appreciate the interaction, and I'll turn it back to you, David. Is there anything else?
All right, excellent. Well, I wanted to point out that I put a link in the chat box there for the StorageCraft website. Just click on that to get more information on StorageCraft. Give the trial a shot for yourself. Try it out in your own lab environment. See how it can help you. Also, check out the OneXafe Converged solution. And before we go, I want to announce the winner of the Amazon $300 gift card that's going to Tyler Davis of Ohio. Congratulations, Tyler Davis of Ohio. Again, thank you to StorageCraft for supporting today's event. Great presentation from Sean. Thank you for being on the event today, and thank you everyone out there who joined us. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.